Hi, folks. This is Dr. Mike, and I wanted to bring you some of my perspective to chapter or week number 2 as we go into it. Partially from things that I read in your postings that I wanted just to elaborate on a little bit, to give you a little bit more context into what was going on. We talked a little bit last time about our reasons for starting to study this course with the Sumerians and the advent of their writing. Other things are going on in other countries, in other surrounding areas. The Phoenicians, who are responsible for a lot of the shipping and trading, are going to develop the alphabet and going to transfer their alphabet to different areas, which will speed up the process of writing and written language. The Mesopotamians on the Tigris and Euphrates River, which is in current day Iraq, living together, building a civilization, and the importance of being around water. I think I mentioned to you in the last time, is astronomical. You need water for almost every aspect of your life, from cleaning to cooking, to even to religious worship. And that's where the process of ritual cleansing comes in. In most religions, they will have some element of that ritual cleansing aspect. We're moving from hunter-gatherers to civilization when people start to live together. That word civilization is kind of a misnomer because you can stuff that word with just about anything that you want to. I mean, when the British came to the Americas, they promised the Native Americans, if you will be civilized, we'll let you live among us, which was a lie. But at any rate, what they meant by that was that you quit roaming around, you settle down, you live in a conventional house, you wear European clothing, and you adopt our religion, and we will let you live among us. That was the civilization standard of that day. In this earlier day, they're moving from hunters and gatherers, where smaller bands of, say, 20 people in a family traveled and looked for food. And we've done some really interesting studies on that recently to show that they had probably more leisure time than anybody else in the world, which is contrary to what we normally think, that if you're looking for food, you are looking 24/7 trying to find food. But by living together in larger groups, they were able to specialize their task so that not everybody had to look for food. Now some people could build dwellings, or some people could make bowls, or they could weave mats, or whatever it was, and trade for food from those who were actually going out and getting the food. So this specialization is going to be what you're seeing when we get to the Assyrians, we get to the Egyptians especially. Egypt is in a very unique place because it gave it tremendous protection from outside forces coming in and taking over the country. It's very difficult to take Egypt. And you see that even as late as the 1800s, when Napoleon tries it, when Alexander the Great tries it, all these things, because of the Delta and because of the marshlands, you can't really land troops from ships there. So basically the only way on land is to come in from the south, which was difficult, but it gave the Egyptians kind of a cocoon of protection so that they went further than these other countries did. Many of you mentioned in your writings about their embalming process, which was their religion, a very detailed religious practice that they had, ideas about the afterlife. And keep in mind, though, that that was not for everyone in the Egyptian society. There were two levels of society. There were the wealthy, the Pharaoh's family. Those are the ones who built the Great Pyramids, who probably went through the embalming process because they were going to need that body in the next life. They actually buried their slaves that carried them to their rest in the pyramid. There was a trip lever sometimes on the pyramid that locked them in there. So they died with their Pharaoh or the Pharaoh's wife or whoever, because she would need servants in the next life. They weren't very careful about embalming their bodies, but they certainly did do that with the pharaohs. And so these are very specialized tasks that are quite interesting. So in addition to the Egyptians, you have the Hebrews. Now, one thing I want to mention to you about Hebrew history that you need to think about, from our perception as Christians and listening to preaching and reading the text, we come away with an impression that I think is not quite accurate. And that is that Israel was huge, a big kingdom, very powerful, through a continuity of kingdoms around them. I really think that more likely that the times when Israel exerted power and grew into a stronger kingdom was during the time when the bigger kingdoms like Egypt and Babylon and Persia and Assyria and all these, when they began to wane. And that's the story of world history. Kingdoms wax and wane, and they'll fall into disorder. They'll lose their ruler, and the next guy's not quite as strong. During those weak times, Israel seemed to be able to stand up and gain a little bit of strength. And so it explains some of the things with Saul and, of course, with Solomon, who probably found a period of time that was a lot weaker for a lot longer period of time. So his reign was a lot stronger. But then you find the other ones when that goes away during the Babylonian captivity, and the Assyrians, when they exert their power, then the northern part of Israel gets carried away into captivity, the 10 tribes, and then later Babylon will carry away the two, and we get the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The one contribution, or the couple contributions that the Hebrews make is, number one, the idea of monotheism, of one God. That is not something that happens around them. Most of those are polytheistic gods. We don't know what kind of worship was going on in Egypt during the 430 years of captivity, but we know that the Hebrew religion as such. Now, Abraham, of course, had faith. His sons had faith. Their children went to Egypt for 430 years. And we don't know what kind, we know that people like, we're reminded of Moses' parents who by faith put Moses in a basket. There was some element of faith there, but it wasn't the very detailed religious practices that they're going to develop in the wilderness, and certainly not the ones they're going to come back from Babylon with. So there's going to be a great change in Hebrew religion, but the idea of monotheism is going to be what they contribute to the world with the 10 Commandments. And I think that's important because you have two very definite tracks here in the ancient world. You have the laws of Hammurabi, in which it is a set of rules for two classes of people, the wealthy and the poor. And if you kill someone's slave and you were poor, you'd be put to death. If you kill someone's slave and you were rich, they would allow you to pay for the slave and you were fine. So two sets of rules. The 10 Commandments will be one set of rules for everyone. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Those are just the absolute basic standards that have hung around and stayed there until the present day. When you go into a courthouse, it's not unusual to see the 10 Commandments on the wall, because that was our original founding documents, if you will. The other thing that the Hebrews contribute through their religion is the idea of the value of the individual. Prior to this, and it will continue in most countries outside of Israel, the value of the human life is very, very nil. You're basically fodder for some king's army, but you don't see the value placed upon the individual that the Hebrew religious system does. It values the individual, his sins, his ability to get forgiveness. Those kind of things are very important. The other thing that the Hebrews will contribute is a linear view of history. For the first time, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's something to look forward to. And this is going to be a major contribution in the West, because we always have this idea that there's something better coming. There is a linear view. We've had a past, we have a present, and we're looking forward to a future. That is going to be distinctly Hebrew, and it'll be something that they contribute to us that is going to be of great value. So as you look at these great kingdoms in this week and a little bit into the next week, realize that they rise and fall. That's the human story of the West. We're constantly, no government lasts forever, it seems. And when we look at our own government, we realize with trepidation that democracy had never been done anywhere else in the world except in ancient Athens, in a city. It had never been tried on the scale that the founding fathers tried it. And we've managed to keep it for 300 years. Whether we keep it for 300 more, there's a lot of doubts been raised recently about whether that's going to happen or not. So you see governments rise and fall. And history is basically God's unfolding of his story in the world and his working in the lives of men. And so we see all of these things as we pass through history we're basically, just giving a nod here and there to the important points that it would be wise for you to take to heart and to think about and to remember as we build the story of Western civilization. And as Christians realize that God's in control, that nothing ever surprises him. There is no panic button near the throne of God. I posted for you last night some of this in written form so that you understand, especially the 2 chapters in the book of Daniel that will have, I think that as you take this history course, you got to realize that our Bible is as up to date as most history books. But there are 2 stories in Daniel, one in chapter 2, one in chapter 7. If you remember in chapter number 2, there is the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, when he saw this image with a head of gold and shoulders and chest of silver and waist of brass and legs of iron. And Daniel interpreted that dream to be the view of Gentile world history. These are the kingdoms that are coming. They will always become weaker than the one before them. And then there's a stone that's cut out of the mountainside, which represented Jesus Christ, which is going to destroy all of that history. Then chapter 7 is about these wild animals that Daniel has his dream. And that's how God sees human history, that we're a bunch of ravenous wild animals that are just destroying whatever God has put here for us. And sometimes you can see that quite well. We're not interested in global warming. We're not interested in honesty and fairness and all those things, but we're literally destroying ourselves. And I think you can see that very well. So you can read that document that I published for you. Hopefully it might be of some interest. I do invite your questions. I encourage dialogue. Something you don't agree with, of course, talk to me about that. If you have a question about something that we talk about in our perspective, please let me know that. And I'm always happy to do that. God bless you. And I prayed for you today, and I wish you a happy day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.